Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Conservatives can be very funny people. As a conservative myself, it's been humorous watching so many in the conservative movement very concerned about the electoral power of Mark Carney. Did you guys see that press conference he did yesterday? Mark Carney can't get through a press conference with friendly media only without shooting himself in the foot. I am convinced if we tied Mark Carney's hands behind his back and blindfolded him, he would still find a way of shooting himself in the foot. There was about 4 instances of him absolutely scuffing an answer in this press conference, despite the fact that it should be very easy to at least lie to dodge a question that he doesn't like. Even when he liked the question, even when the question was softball pitched to him, he somehow still screwed it up. He even screwed up his commitment to get rid of the carbon tax because he's now endorsed the idea of having carbon taxes again. This press conference was so bad, he got into it with Rosemary Barton, who I no doubt has had her Justin Trudeau tattoo, I assume she has, crossed out and replaced by a Mark Carney tattoo, because she is in favor of whoever the Liberal leader is, always. In fact, he belittles her in this press conference, and Rosemary still went out on social media to attack conservatives over it, because of course it's the conservatives' fault that Mark Carney attacked and belittled her. Anyways, I'm going to get into this press conference in just a second here. I want to start off with the global news question about his personal assets that he's put into a blind trust, then go into the situation with Rosemary Barton. Then we will be transitioning on to his stuff about America and the carbon tax. It was a wall-to-wall disaster. But before I get into it, guys, make sure to like this video if you like the channel, subscribe if you like these videos and you haven't yet subscribed, and leave a comment on anything you find particularly interesting about what we have going on here or other stuff you want me to note. Even if I don't comment back or like what you guys post, I always try and scroll through to see what people think. Anyways, without further ado, here is Mark Carney getting into it with the global news journalist about his personal assets in the blind trust.
Mr. Carney, Stephanie Levitz, Globe and Mail.
Sorry, it's the Globe and Mail, not Global News.
Understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know. Because I know you know this, you know that these...
He's so condescending. This is how you would talk to somebody if you're their boss and you're trying to indicate that I'm a little better than you. Doesn't call her Miss Levitt, he calls her Stephanie. You already know this. I know that you know this. Talking about how I'm following all the rules about how I put my assets into the blind trust and I've done everything. Everyone understands that you follow the rules about putting yourself in a blind trust. But he's pretending once he puts his assets in a blind trust, oh, I don't even know what the assets look like anymore. They've been in the blind trust for 5 seconds. It could be anything. It's the dumbest argument ever. Just tell people, how much money do you have in housing? How much money do you have in oil and gas, in green projects? Just tell us. We just want to know that if your government starts handing out subsidies to particular industries and certain companies that you have a lot of money invested into start getting disproportionate subsidies, that we know whether or not that actually looks like a conflict of interest, or your company that you have money invested in just happened to outcompete everyone else because they made a better offer. But he doesn't want to do that because it makes him look bad. And running away from the question is what makes you look the worst.
These requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister. So I'm complying with the rules of the Ethics Commissioner, going through the processes and all these things that are necessary.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
I can name one. His company, Brookfield Asset Management, that he used to be the chair of, that he obviously would have invested in all the ventures that Brookfield was in, that they were supporting pipelines in countries like the UAE and Brazil at the same time he was opposing pipelines in Canada. In fact, opposing pipelines in Canada necessarily means that his investments in pipelines in Brazil and the UAE are worth more. Because if more pipelines come onto the field in Canada, that means the value of pipelines everywhere else falls, because in North America, we'd rather use oil and gas that's right here rather than in some far off distant land. But I'll let this finish up with Mark Carney still just trying to dodge the idea. Well, I'm complying actually ahead of time. I didn't have to disclose or put anything in a blind trust for a couple months now. Who cares? The whole point is that you won't tell us what's in it.
You are not open to any conflict of interest.
Yes.
John spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean,
This is the Rosemary Barton moment. She asked basically, like, it's hard to believe that someone who's been in the private sector for this long doesn't have a conflict of interest with all the various investments he has. The man's worth like $50 million. He has money invested in a lot of things. So we just want to know what could potentially be a conflict of interest. In fact, if he just said, here's all my companies, and you can ascertain what the potential conflicts of interest are, but I'm going to avoid investing anything in these companies like the plague. I'm not going to give any special handouts to anything I'm invested in. If he was transparent, it would help him. In fact, he's doing what Andrew Scheer did in 2019, and I don't dislike Andrew Scheer, but what Andrew Scheer did is that every time he was asked a pro-life question from the media, he would run away from the question. If he was just saying, yeah, I'm pro-life and I will vote in a pro-life direction and other members of my caucus can vote how they like, the questions would go away. Running away from something where if you just said what the truth is, the whole situation would go away. But he just can't handle it because he's so risk averse.
You start from a prior of conflict and ill will.
He thinks Rosemary Barton has ill will towards him. You have to be drunk or high to think that Rosemary Barton has any bone in her body that dislikes a liberal.
I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country. I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner. And I will continue to comply with those rules.
This is why he's just like Justin Trudeau. And I'm not just trying to use that slogan because the Conservatives use it. I really honestly usually hate slogans. It's just descriptively correct right now that he does the bare minimum to comply with ethical standards. And then when anyone asks for any more, he talks down to them. That was Mark Carney talking down to media allies of him, where if he gave them anything to work with, they would swing right behind him and say he's the most transparent man on the planet. In fact, he doesn't just not have any conflicts of interest, he has anti-conflicts of interest. If he gives money to his own companies, that's actually demonstrating how ethical he is because he told us he was invested in them in the first place. This is what people like Rosemary Barton are like. Remember, him talking down to Rosemary Barton there, as well as Levitt, scored Rosemary Barton, for some reason, an opportunity to attack conservatives, because she's like, ooh, conservatives won't come on my show, and yet they're critiquing Mark Carney, belittling me. It's like conservatives never get invited onto your show. The only time you invite a conservative is when you want to grill them for something unfair, and they're just not going to comply with your struggle session. Utterly ridiculous. But let's move on to another issue, and that is of the carbon tax. Somehow, Mark Carney actually believes that now Canada needs a carbon tax in order to be competitive on trade. I thought the carbon tax was divisive and bad, as he said. Or Mark Carney's really just demonstrating who he is, and now he's in favor of the carbon tax again, now that he has a convenient excuse saying, oh, countries won't trade with us unless we have a carbon tax. So that's why he's going to increase the industrial carbon tax even more to make up for him reducing the carbon tax rate on consumers to zero. And by the way, This means that people are going to pay as much, if not more, in the carbon tax than before. It doesn't matter who the tax is on. A tax on anybody in a domestic economy means it's a tax on everybody.
In Canada today, your political opponent, Mr. Poilievre, said that he would axe the industrial price on carbon. And I'd like to understand from you if you think that at this time, with all the threats against many of our big mainstay industries, which also are large emitters, if you think that your plan to tax them remains a viable and publicly supported plan.
Yeah. So our plan, and in fact, the regime that's in place in Canada, and a variant of this regime is.
It goes on forever. I actually just want to play the shorter clip of this that Poilievre played. He goes on forever here, but here's the 19-second version where he claims that you have to have the carbon tax in order to be like economically viable.
Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. So we are able to think one step ahead.
That's also utterly ridiculous. Do you think China has a carbon tax or India has a carbon tax? Heck no. Do you think that they actually care? Even the European Union, they can be as sanctimonious as they want. They will take Canadian oil and gas products if you give it to them. Here's another like absolutely silly thing he did in this press conference. He will not go down and meet with Donald Trump. You know, the main problem we're having with trade right now, yet he won't engage with it. It's not a good tactic because he's not positioning himself well. He's not even saying, no, he can come to me and talk. That would be a position of strength. He's just ignoring him. He went to France and the UK, and now he's in Nunavut. He just keeps going to random locations that are not going to solve our trade problems because he is avoiding any amount of perceived rhetorical conflict. He's also not calling out China and the CCP for threatening a 100% tariff on canola oil, other agricultural products, and seafood products, which would devastate not only the Saskatchewan economy for canola, but BC and Nova Scotia. And this guy won't call it out because he's in favor of the CCP. He doesn't care what the CCP does.
Behind closed doors, did any of the leaders you met with today offer assurances that they would have Canada's back if Donald Trump uses greater economic force or more to annex or absorb Canada?
Well, I would know. Let me state the obvious, which is that all of us are members of NATO. All of us have respect Article 5 of NATO. So the or more part of your question is unthinkable. What we did discuss is, particularly with France, is deeper security and military cooperation, which is in the interests of overall global security. And we did discuss in both cases deepening of our economic ties. Thank you.
What does that even mean? Also, like, it's just stupid anti-American stuff. He basically admitted that's why he's going and talking to France and the UK.
Prime Minister Mike with CTV News. I take your point earlier on a number of our allies talking about our sovereignty today, but nobody's come out forcefully and said those comments about the 51st state are just not on. Do you think that our traditional allies are not sticking their necks out because they're concerned that if they say something that'll anger President Trump, that they'll be next?
That they'll be next? That Trump's going to annex the UK and France? No, it's a joke. It's a joke to throw stupid people like Justin Trudeau off balance by saying, oh, maybe Canada should be the 51st state.
I think I would take seriously what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said today. I don't think one needs to respond to every comment about another country. Look, we can stand up for ourselves. It's Canada strong. We can stand up for ourselves. We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful. They're not helpful. And they need to stop before, and they will have to stop before we sit down and have a conversation about our broader partnership with the United States. But we're Canada. We don't need other people to come to our.
So he's not going to talk to the United States, to solve the trade issue, in which I don't think we have to give up anything. We just basically have to sit down and like give Trump a rhetorical moment where, hey, we're on board now and everyone can win. Was the whole situation silly from the beginning? Yeah, at least it kind of forced Canada to take border security more seriously, which we hadn't been taking seriously before. Was that fully what motivated Trump? Probably not. Trump is also just trying to get wins from people who have wronged him in the past, like Justin Trudeau mocking him and whatnot. Yeah, it was petty. At the same time, it's even more petty that now we won't sit down with him until he like rescinds his joke. By the way, watch all these clips of Mark Carney in this press conference, and he's just horrible on camera. This should have taken me. I'm sorry we've had to watch through so many clips, but each of these statements he's made should have taken like 20 seconds to say. And he's going, well, I've been talking to our allies, and we had long sit-down discussions. And I defer to what the UK Prime Minister said. Like, just is not made for TV. I've heard people say, well, people shouldn't underestimate Mark Carney in a debate. I'm not underestimating Mark Carney in a debate. I am properly estimating that he would suck in a debate with Pierre Poilievre because he has like no energy. He is the definition of a bad politician. Use the acronym BAD. He is boring, annoying, and dumb. Anyways, so that should be probably it for me today. I think the Carney honeymoon is going to end sooner than people think because the lack of any real strength or charisma is going to catch up to him, and that he wasn't what people were wanting to dream that he was. I even showed you in the Angus Reid poll yesterday, which is not a good poll. But even in that poll, which I think is overestimating how many liberals are out there, when you poll liberals on whether or not they are definitely going to be voting liberal, they are far more unsure if they're actually voting liberal than conservatives are. People who are definitely voting conservative, who are committed right now, is 66% of people who pick CPC in a poll. The amount of liberals who are very sure that they're going to be showing up and voting liberal is only 49. That's a 17-point gap of very likely voters to show up. In fact, then the liberals had far more people saying that they're very unlikely to be showing up or somewhat unlikely to show up and vote in this next election. It was like 5% for the conservatives that were, fairly unlikely to be showing up compared to 10% fairly unlikely to show up for the liberals. That's terrible. And I think that is indicative of a honeymoon that is built on sand and will collapse as soon as any real struggle happens. And I think this is almost starting to be enough. The fact that he can't get through a press conference without generating scandals is a problem when he's going to have to campaign and speak to the media every single day. You really can't hide from the media in a Canadian election because it's so short that if people don't even remember he actually spoke to the media once, it's going to be very apparent because Canadians will not be paying attention during the normal year. And then as soon as the election gets called, everyone starts really focusing on that 30 days. So if you look bad in that 30 days, that's all people know about them is that 30 days. But anyways, so that's truly it now. I always end up rambling on another topic before I actually end it. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, do all that great stuff. Share it with your friends, and I'll see you guys next time.